The world inside Forrester Creations was designed to be flawless. Every corner gleamed. Every sketch on the design board was a promise of control and beauty. But control was an illusion, one that could dissolve in an instant, and it happened on a morning that began like any other, with Ridge Forrester standing at the head of the conference table, reviewing fabric samples, gesturing toward a new campaign meant to restore the company's reputation after months of public chaos. The scandal of Luna Nozawa's crimes still lingered in every conversation, every news headline, and though the Forrester name had weathered storms before, this one had struck something raw. Luna's attack on Will Spencer had not only shattered lives, it had fractured alliances. Steffi, fierce as ever, had taken the lead in managing the fallout, wielding the family brand like a weapon. Brooke, radiant but relentless, had thrown herself into damage control, while Taylor tried from afar to remind everyone that empathy was not weakness. Ridge had been the only one who hesitated. He had watched the mob of public outrage swell online, the way every post turned Luna into a symbol instead of a person, and something inside him recoiled. "Maybe it's not that simple," he'd said once, voice low during a private argument with Steffi. "Maybe we're seeing what they want us to see." That one sentence had cracked the room open. Steffi's fury had been instant. She drugged him, Dad. She assaulted him. What else do you need to see? Brooke, standing beside her, nodded sharply. "Don't let your guilt twist this, Ridge. You can't protect everyone. Luna is a manipulator, just like her mother." Ridge had said nothing more after that. But the image of Luna, pale under prison lights, haunted him long after the cameras stopped rolling. He wasn't defending her actions. He was questioning the world that had made monsters out of women and headlines out of pain. The thought unsettled him, and it unsettled everyone else even more. And then, weeks later, he collapsed. It happened in the middle of another strategy meeting. One moment he was flipping through portfolio pages, the next the world tilted. The edges of his vision darkened, like ink spreading through water. He tried to speak, to steady himself, but his tongue felt thick, his thoughts scattering like spilled glass. Steffi's scream was the last sound he heard before everything went black. The hospital lights were too bright. Machines hummed beside him, rhythmic and indifferent. Brooke sat by his bed, her hand wrapped around his, whispering fragments of prayers she hadn't said in years. Steffi paced the hallway, voice sharp as she barked questions at the doctors. Taylor arrived within hours, her calm a brittle mask. When the results came back, none of them were ready for what they said. A tumor. Frontal lobe. The part of the brain that controlled emotion, judgment, and impulse. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible and devastating. The doctor explained with clinical precision that such tumors could alter personality, heighten aggression, cloud logic, twist empathy into something unrecognizable. It was possible that Ridge's recent mood swings, his indecision between Brooke and Taylor, his bursts of temper, his uncharacteristic doubts about Luna's guilt, all of it had been symptoms of a brain slowly betraying him. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was too thick for comfort, too fragile to break. Finally, Steffi whispered, "You mean he wasn't himself?" Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "We thought he was just lost again. That it was another midlife crisis, another emotional spiral." Her voice cracked. "We didn't see it." Taylor's hand trembled as she adjusted her glasses. "No one could have known," she said gently, though her eyes betrayed her own guilt. "The signs were subtle, confusion, mood swings. We all miss them. But guilt, once awakened, doesn't fade. It metastasizes, turning inward until it poisons everything." When Ridge woke, the faces around him were blurred by tears and fear. He tried to smile, to make a joke, to reassure them, but his words came out slower, the cadence uncertain. Brooke touched his cheek, whispering his name as though saying it might anchor him. For the first time in years, Ridge looked small, not the patriarch of a fashion empire, not the man who had built kingdoms from fabric and charisma, but simply human. The following days blurred together. Doctors debated surgical options, timelines, risks. The tumor was operable, but the recovery uncertain. Ridge listened, nodded, and said little. In moments of lucidity, he watched the people he loved moving around him, whispering in corners, speaking as though he were already gone. He felt trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him, a mind that betrayed him with flashes of confusion and unwanted clarity. And through it all, the world outside refused to pause. The Luna scandal still raged. News outlets dissected every angle: the assault, the pregnancy, the miscarriage rumors, the conspiracy theories. The Forresters had spent months insisting on their distance from the chaos, yet here they were again, entangled in it through Ridge's words, replayed endlessly on talk shows. Maybe she's a product of something worse. That sentence resurfaced everywhere. Was Ridge Forrester sympathizing with a criminal? Is the Forrester patriarch losing touch with reality? The timing was cruel. When Brooke read one of the headlines aloud, her voice shook. They're saying he's defending her because he's sick. Steffi's jaw tightened. Then we set the record straight. We tell them the truth. We tell them he's not well. Taylor shook her head instantly.
No.
That would destroy his dignity. His privacy. Brooke snapped. Dignity? They're already destroying his name. The three women stood there, bound by love for the same man but divided by everything else: fear, guilt, and pride. Meanwhile, Ridge listened from his hospital bed, eyes half closed. He heard enough to understand that he had become the battlefield. His life had always been a war between them: Brooke's passion, Taylor's reason, Steffi's ambition. Now his illness had made him both weapon and wound. Days stretched into weeks. The surgery was scheduled. The night before, Ridge sat alone in his hospital room, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He saw a stranger looking back, eyes shadowed, expression hollow. He thought about Luna again. Not the woman who had hurt Will, but the broken shape of her in the news photos, the way her story had been devoured by a system that needed villains to sell redemption. Maybe he had been right to ask if she was a symptom, not a cause. Maybe his tumor had only stripped away the filters that others used to hide from ugly truths. He didn't know anymore. He couldn't trust his own mind. The surgery took 7 hours. When it was over, the doctors said the words everyone had been waiting to hear. He made it. Relief crashed through the family like a wave, and yet, beneath it, another question grew. Who would he be now? The recovery was slow. Ridge's speech was intact, but his emotions were strange, unpredictable. Some days he was calm, almost eerily so. Other days, he lashed out without warning, at nurses, at family, at himself. He wept for things he couldn't name. He laughed at things that weren't funny. Once, during a visit, Steffi showed him a press release she had written to clarify the company's stance on the Luna case. We're condemning her actions publicly, but we're also emphasizing mental health reform, she explained. Ridge read it, then tore it in half. You can't condemn and empathize at the same time, he said quietly. You have to choose. Steffi froze. That's not fair. I'm trying to protect you, to protect us. He smiled faintly. From the truth. It was the first moment she saw a glimpse of her father's old fire, and it terrified her. Brooke and Taylor each visited separately, unable to be in the same room without reopening old wounds. Brooke spoke to him of home, of recovery, of returning to normalcy. Taylor spoke to him of patience and balance, of forgiveness. Ridge listened, nodding, but his thoughts drifted. He could feel the fissures widening in the family, the subtle way love could curdle into guilt and guilt into resentment. Outside, the world moved on. But inside Forrester Creations, whispers grew louder. Investors were nervous. A leader with a brain tumor was a liability, and Steffi had quietly begun assuming control. The staff noticed. Rumors spread that Ridge's influence was ending, that his illness was a metaphor for a dynasty losing its mind. One afternoon, Ridge walked into the office unannounced. His gait was slower, his face paler, but his eyes, though shadowed, were alive. I still know how to design, he said simply. The silence that followed was uncomfortable.
No one knew how to respond.
Steffi forced a smile. gesturing toward the sketch table. Of course, Dad. Show us. He picked up a pencil, his hand trembling slightly. For a moment he hesitated. Then, slowly, he began to draw sweeping lines, bold and strange. When he finished, the room was silent. The design was nothing like the clean, classic elegance of Forster creations. It was raw, chaotic, almost violent, a dress that looked like a wound turned into fabric. "It's ugly," someone whispered. Ridge looked at it for a long time, then nodded. "Maybe it's the truth." Steffi ordered the sketch removed before the press could see it. But word got out anyway. The tabloids called it Ridge Forrester's Meltdown Collection. Analysts debated whether it was genius or madness. Brooke begged him to rest. Steffi tried to reason with him. Taylor said nothing, her eyes full of something too complex to name. In the quiet hours, Ridge began writing. Not designs, but thoughts, scattered reflections on art, morality, and madness. He filled journals with questions that frightened him. Who am I without the part of my brain they cut out? How do you trust emotions when they can be tumors? What if the illness wasn't the distortion, but the clarity? Those writings were never meant to be read. But one night, a junior designer found a page left on his desk. It read, "We destroy what we can't control, then call it justice." Maybe Luna understood that better than any of us. The leak hit the internet within hours. The backlash was immediate. Boycott Forster trended within minutes. The press accused Ridge of sympathizing with a criminal again. Brooke and Steffi were furious. "They'll think you're defending her all over again." Steffi cried. "Do you have any idea what this does to us?" Ridge looked at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe they should know what us means. It was the moment she realized she didn't know who he was anymore, or worse, that maybe she never had. The family fractured under the weight of it all. Brooke retreated into public relations battles. Steffi hardened, turning colder with each interview. Taylor tried to play mediator, but her voice was drowned out by noise. And Ridge, caught in the center, became both scapegoat and symbol, a man whose illness had exposed more than it destroyed. When the doctors finally declared him stable, no one celebrated. Stability didn't mean recovery. It meant permanence. Ridge would live, but he would never again be entirely the man they had known. One evening, he walked through the empty Forster office, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. The sketches on the wall were immaculate, untouched by human imperfection. He ran his fingers over one, tracing the flawless lines. "Perfect," he whispered. "And dead." He thought of Luna then, not as the villain or the victim, but as the spark that had burned everything false to the ground. Her story had forced them all to choose sides, to draw moral lines they could no longer erase. And in their fury, they had missed something essential, that sometimes evil isn't born from malice, but from a world that refuses to see its own decay. When Steffi entered the room moments later, she found him standing at the window, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "They think you've lost your mind," she said softly. Ridge turned, his voice calm. "Maybe I finally found it." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because in that instant, she saw the truth she'd been avoiding. His illness hadn't made him a stranger. It had made him honest. The scandal eventually faded, as scandals always do. Luna's name disappeared from headlines, replaced by new tragedies. The Forresters rebuilt their brand, their family, their empire. But beneath the glamour, a quiet change had taken root, a haunting awareness that perfection had a cost, and that even the purest intentions could rot when left unexamined. Ridge lived on, neither saint nor sinner, but something in between, a man reborn from the ashes of his own brain. Some days, he designed again, his work darker but more human. Other days, he wandered the halls, touching the fabric as though feeling for a pulse. Brooke visited often, bringing him coffee and memories. Steffi learned to listen before speaking. And Taylor, ever the observer, understood that the tumor had not stolen Ridge's mind, it had stripped away his masks. In the end, the question that lingered over them all wasn't whether Ridge had changed because of the tumor. It was whether the rest of them had ever truly seen him before it. The news spread through the halls of Forrester Creations like a crack of thunder. Ridge Forrester had a brain tumor. The revelation shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded the man for decades. The artist, the patriarch, the restless spirit who had built his family's empire from ambition and instinct. For years, Ridge had been the axis around which Forrester Creations spun. Now, that axis was trembling. When the MRI results were leaked, the headlines were merciless. Forrester Dynasty in crisis as Ridge battles brain tumor. Investors panicked. Designers whispered in corners. Journalists dissected his every past decision, suggesting that the erratic swings between passion and cold detachment that had marked his recent months, his reckless judgment calls, his uncharacteristic defense of Luna Nozawa, were all symptoms of something deeper and darker inside his brain. For the family, it was more than an illness. It was a reckoning. Brooke Logan tried to keep calm, to turn chaos into control, as she always did. She reached out to her old connections in New York and Maryland, where the East Coast fashion and medical worlds often overlapped in unexpected ways. It was through a designer friend in Baltimore that she heard about the neurological oncology experimental program at the Fairmont Research Institute, a facility on the outskirts of a place called Fairmont Crest. It was a new and discreet branch tied to an ambitious pharmaceutical conglomerate with a reputation for miracles and moral gray zones. Their methods were radical, their success rate whispered about more than published, and their investors had deep ties to both the medical and fashion industries. Forrester Creations' publicist framed it perfectly, a story of hope, innovation, and courage. Behind the scenes, Brooke saw it as something else, a chance to save Ridge and restore the family's reputation at the same time. The shareholders, initially terrified that the face of Forrester might fade away, latched onto this new narrative. The board approved funding for Ridge's travel, couching it as brand outreach, to a cross-industry initiative that could later tie into Forrester's philanthropic portfolio. It was spin, but it bought them time. Brooke arranged everything quietly, determined to keep control, even as Steffi protested. He doesn't need to be a lab rat, her daughter argued. But Brooke's tone was cold, pragmatic. He needs a future. When Ridge arrived at Fairmont Crest, the first thing he noticed wasn't the sterile smell of hospitals or the distant hum of machines, but the atmosphere, heavy with something unsaid. The Fairmont facility was pristine, but the silence was unnatural. Everyone smiled too much, spoke too carefully. The doctors referred to him as Mr. Forrester, their tone reverent, as though he were more than a patient, a prize. He signed the intake forms with a shaky hand, pretending not to notice the branding materials already prepared by the pharmaceutical team, glossy pamphlets titled, Hope Through Innovation, The Forrester Case. The Fairmont Research Institute was not what it seemed. The corridors of its gleaming wings led into private labs funded by Crest Farm International, a biotech giant with a history of controversial clinical trials. The company's CEO, a man named Victor Lang, had built his empire on experimental treatments fast-tracked through government loopholes. He was charismatic, dangerous, and very aware of Ridge's public value. Ridge wasn't just a patient. He was a potential marketing campaign, a living, breathing testament to Crest Farm's miracle. Meanwhile, the quiet town surrounding Fairmont Crest was anything but peaceful. At the heart of it lay a tangle of family feuds and buried scandals that the outside world knew only through whispers. Ridge's path soon crossed with two of its most entangled residents, Danny and Andre, figures who, to the public eye, were merely names in another universe of soap operatic chaos. But for Ridge, their presence would become the mirror through which he saw his own corruption. Danny was a woman living on the edge of ruin. A philanthropist by title, she was under quiet investigation for her involvement in a medical foundation accused of laundering donations through hospital research programs, the same programs now tied to Crest Farm. Her past was wrapped in glamour, her present in fear. Andre, her estranged partner and once a respected lawyer, was caught in his own spiral, exposed for covering up trial violations that had resulted in patient deaths years ago. Both had come to Fairmont Crest under the illusion of redemption, seeking forgiveness in the shadows of their crimes. When Ridge met them, it was almost accidental. A collision in the hospital courtyard, three broken people intersecting by fate or design. At first, Ridge knew nothing of their connection to the larger game. He was focused on his treatment, the sharp rhythm of machines, the injections that left his veins burning, the daily interviews with doctors who asked more about his emotional reactions than his symptoms. They wanted his data, his story, his vulnerability. Brooke, miles away in Los Angeles, didn't see the danger growing beneath the glossy reports she received from the East Coast. She saw only progress, Ridge responding well to initial phase, cognitive function improving. She told the family that science was winning. But science had its price. Crest Farms researchers were under pressure. Investors wanted results, and Ridge's name was the perfect catalyst. When early scans showed no improvement, Victor Lang ordered an escalation, a new drug cocktail that bypassed safety protocols. Danny, through her work with the Fairmont Medical Board, discovered what they were planning. She tried to warn Ridge, meeting him in the hospital garden late one night. "They're going to use you," she said, voice trembling. "You're not a patient to them, you're a prototype." Ridge's expression darkened. He'd suspected it, but hearing it aloud made the truth unbearable. "Then why are you still here?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Andre soon entered the picture, drawn by his own suspicions about Crest Farms funding. He had once represented a Crest Farms subsidiary in a lawsuit involving falsified trial data, a case buried under settlements and NDAs. The patterns were the same now, and he feared that Ridge's life was part of a wider experiment meant to test a drug too dangerous for public release. Together, Danny and Andre began digging, using their inside access to trace financial records. What they found horrified them: a network of off-book payments connecting Crest Farm to fashion sponsors, hospital administrators, and even media outlets. Ridge's treatment wasn't just a medical case, it was a marketing spectacle waiting to happen. As these discoveries unfolded, something unexpected stirred hundreds of miles away. Luna Nozawa, still imprisoned in California, caught wind of the story through a tabloid smuggled into her cell. The headline read, "Forester designer battles tumor in Maryland. Hope or exploitation?" Luna froze, staring at Ridge's photograph. He had been one of the few who had ever spoken of her with something resembling fairness, who had questioned whether she was a monster or a symptom of something bigger. Now, the idea of him being used by the same kind of power structures that had once destroyed her filled her with a manic sense of purpose. She began plotting her own escape. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had once used manipulation to gain freedom. Now she would use desperation. Rumors spread through the prison yard that she had bribed a guard, that a laundry cart had gone missing. Within a week, Luna was gone. Her destination: Fairmont Crest. The place where, unbeknownst to her, two worlds were about to collide: the bright cruelty of Los Angeles fashion and the dark underbelly of Maryland's medical empire. As Ridge's condition fluctuated, so did his perception of reality.